advocating for yourself is not the same as being difficult. Hola, welcome to Sana Sana podcast. I'm your host, Eileen Lopez-Tomé. I'm a first-generation Cuban-American woman, breast cancer survivor, and mother of 5. I'm also a certified professional coach. Sana Sana is dedicated to you, Hispanic and Latina breast cancer survivors who've always been the strong ones and now feel lost in their identity after cancer diagnosis. Every week, I'll be sharing the foundation of my ecosystem of healing coaching process, which I use to help my clients restore trust in their bodies, release perfectionism, advocate for themselves, and live from a place of healing and peace rather than survival. Tune in to hear my real-life experiences, carving a new path for myself after remission, but helping my coaching clients carve a new path for themselves too. Hello, sister survivors, and welcome to episode 10 of Sana Sana. Today, we're going to talk about freedom flights, deference to doctors and where that comes from, advocacy and self-advocacy when you're being treated for breast cancer, and I'm going to give you some tools to help you put that into practice. So let's get started with a story about my mom. I think I've told you in past episodes that when my mom and dad came to the United States from Cuba in 1969, my mother was 8 months pregnant with me. She had to lie about how far along she was to be able to even leave the country, but that's a story for another day. She and my dad boarded a freedom flight, one of the twice daily chartered flights that were carrying Cubans fleeing Castro's communist Cuba to Miami, Florida. She's carrying me. She doesn't know yet what kind of country she's landing in, what kind of systems she'll have to navigate, or what kind of daughter I will become. She doesn't even know she's having a daughter. So a lot of unknowns, a lot of uncertainty, but she's already doing the thing that would shape everything about how I was raised, trusting that the people in authority, especially here in this country, knew best. The government that arranged the flights, the doctors who would receive her and see her here, and part of that is because the doctors who would see her here had been, if not her doctors, family doctors or well-known doctors in Cuba. So that is the system that would hold her when she lands here in the United States. And that trust in especially the medical system and the medical profession, that deep survival forged deference to medical authority, is part of what carried my family through once they arrived here. And it's also part of what made it hard for a very long time to question a doctor. And for Latina cancer survivors especially, the cost of not questioning can be devastating. So today we're talking about that cultural conditioning that shaped how I showed up in medical spaces and what surviving cancer taught me about when to defer and when to push back. And let me take the opportunity to say here, if you're a survivor who's still trying to figure out how to advocate for yourself in medical spaces, that is part of the work I do. Book a free discovery call at paperbell.me/Eileen Lopez-Tomé, and let's talk. The link is always also in the show notes. So the doctors that my family saw when I was growing up were extraordinary. I think all of them were Cuban physicians, some of whom had been legendary in Cuba and reestablished their practices in the U.S. I think about the pediatrician that my sisters and I saw. I forget his name now, but he was already old when we started seeing him here, and he had been a very famous pediatrician in Cuba. The family doctor, the doctor that my parents and my grandparents saw, and my aunts and uncles, every family member who lived here in Miami saw Dr. Jesus Bravo, and he was a brilliant clinician. Lots of stories about how brilliant he was, what a good clinician he was. Part of his brilliance was how observant he was, how well he knew his patients. And there's a story that goes that he detected my mother's uncle's cancer, and I forget if it was prostate cancer or what type of liver cancer, I don't remember, but he detected my mother's uncle's cancer in Cuba just from the way he walked. He was walking behind him and he noticed him walking funny, and he said, oh, I'm going to have him checked out, and sure enough, he had cancer. So the specialists that my mom saw in particular with like her OBGYN were Cuban. So the OBGYN who delivered me in Atlanta, Georgia, so here in the United States, Dr. Echemendia, his son would later be my sister's OBGYN. So the Echemendia name is associated with many pregnancies and deliveries in my family and in other Cuban families in that community. There was this continuity of trust across generations, both the medical generations and our, the patient generations in my family. And these doctors lived in the same communities as their patients. They knew the same people. They had survived the same things and left Cuba for the same reasons and come here to establish or reestablish themselves. And so the trust that my parents and my family placed in these doctors was earned. I want to be clear because, yes, part of the deference to them was because they were doctors. And so, you respect a medical professional because of the schooling that they had, because they're presumed to be very smart. And in these instances that I just shared with you, they were smart. They had earned the trust of my family. The trust was personal and it was mutual. The doctor's word was final, not because questions were forbidden, but because the answers were treated as the end of the conversation. It wasn't the beginning of one. And underneath that deference, there was something deeper, I think, a survival instinct. When you've left your country, when you've arrived in a new country with nothing, when you're navigating a new language and a new system, and for my parents, when you've arrived in this new country with a wife who's 8 months pregnant, you find the people who seem to know how things work and you trust them. So these doctors had all arrived before my parents. Family members who had come from Cuba before my parents had already been to see them. So you just found your way into that system through referral, through connections, through network, word of mouth, and you stayed in there. You trusted them because they knew how things worked. You don't challenge authority when authority is a thing that's keeping your family alive and well. And let me just say, I was a very sick child, and not to be dramatic, but I had asthma and allergies, and I was allergic to foods and bronchitis, and so these were these doctors that I saw and that my parents saw. You could call them in the middle of the night. You could call them on the weekends. There was no answering service. They would either pick up or they would call you back. So what did I absorb from watching my parents and grandparents with their doctors? What did I observe? Through their body language and their tone and their interactions, I learned that I was supposed to be respectful as a patient, maybe not docile, because especially my dad and my mom as well, they were curious. They would ask questions, but there was never a challenge in those questions. It was really more like, oh, explain it to me. I don't understand exactly what you're saying. Help me to understand the diagnosis or the treatment or your prescription. So I learned to show up in a very specific way in medical appointments. Yes, these doctors were like family, or they were our neighbors, or they were part of our exile community, but there was still a certain level of respect and deference, and there was a point where you stopped asking questions and you accepted what the doctor said as the final word. And I have to say, this isn't just a cultural anecdote. As a Cuban-American, daughter of Cuban immigrants, there is a documented pattern. Studies consistently show that Latino patients are less likely to ask questions of their physicians. They're less likely to seek second opinions. and they're more likely to defer to the medical authority than their white counterparts. And this is a pattern that's rooted in cultural values of respeto, respect, and familismo, that it's deeply meaningful, can create barriers to receiving the best care possible. And, sometimes this comes at a cost, this type of familismo and unquestioned respect. My dad was diagnosed with chronic lymphocytic leukemia in the mid-2000s. I don't remember the exact date. And he asked me, as the eldest daughter, he and my mom both asked me to go to the oncologist appointment with him. It was after diagnosis, before treatment, or maybe, I think it was before treatment. And I remember, I think we already had Google then, I'm pretty sure we did, but I remember searching for what is chronic lymphocytic leukemia. My dad told me the type of treatment that the oncologist was recommending. I looked that up. I looked up what other treatment options there were. And so I went to this oncologist appointment with my parents with a long list of questions. And my dad gave me the okay to ask him. He wouldn't ask them himself. My dad was a very smart, educated, working professional man. But this was about him and his health, and it was something serious. So he asked me to ask the questions, but I had to ask him, is it okay if I ask this long list of questions? And I remember there was like be respectful. Yes, of course you can ask them, but be respectful. And also, I wanted to be respectful of my dad, obviously, and not just march into his doctor's appointment, even though he had invited me with a long list of questions. So, the questions needed to be asked, but they needed to come from someone other than my dad, who was the patient, because he didn't want to seem like he was questioning the doctor. So, his eldest daughter, who had a law degree, who obviously cared about her dad and his well-being and his health, it was okay for me to come in there, first generation American, like, I can just imagine the doctor rolling his eyes. He didn't do it in front of me, to his credit, but rolling his eyes to the back of his head in his mind. If I marched in there with my list of questions like I did, my dad felt like if he did it, it would just be disrespectful. So I did that. Later on, while my dad was still in treatment for the CLL, and we'll talk about more about that maybe in another episode, different type of treatment than other cancers, but while he was in treatment for the CLL, he was diagnosed with lung cancer, stage 4 lung cancer. This happened, so I turned 40 in November of 2009, and he was diagnosed in December or in January of 2010. And it was a brutal diagnosis because it was stage 4, it had metastasized. And I remember Googling that, and the prognosis was not good. And so, his treatment for the lung cancer involved, he had a lot of different things going on. His lungs were filling with fluid. That's how we first found out that there was something wrong. They had to take care of that. Then he started chemo, and the chemotherapy treatment, the mix of chemo drugs, or the order that the chemo drugs were given, was not the standard treatment for this type of lung cancer. When did we find that out? Not until we asked for a second opinion near the end of my dad's 8-month battle with lung cancer. We went to another cancer center and just to see if there was anything else that could be done. And I'll never forget when the oncologist who was talking to us there kind of made a face and, cocked his head to one side and was like, that's not standard treatment for this type of cancer. So the second opinion felt like it came too late to change the outcome. I don't know if it would have changed the outcome anyway, because at the time there was not a lot that could be done for the type and stage of cancer that my dad had. But that thought, that seed was already planted. And it changed me. That experience changed me. I remember thinking back and feeling regret. Why didn't we ask for a second opinion sooner? And I think the answer is because if you can't trust your doctor, who can you trust? And what if the doctor gets insulted or upset? What if they feel second guessed? Then what will that mean for me as a patient? Imagine, and I think we may have even talked about this early on after my dad's diagnosis. But those were my dad's thoughts. And, that belief, again, was rooted in this cultural practice that may have cost my dad, not his life, because like I said, he already had metastatic lung cancer, but maybe would have given him longer with us, which is really what he desperately wanted. So what do I wish? Do I wish that I had done anything differently? And if I did, what do I wish it was? Yes. I wish I had done something differently. I wish, not to blame myself, but I do want to name what I now know that I didn't realize then, which is that it's okay to say to the doctor, I am going to get another opinion. It's okay to stop, even when you're told something devastating like you have stage 4 lung cancer that has spread to other organs and to your bones, because they had spread to my dad's bones. It's okay to take a minute, call another cancer center, even ask the oncologist who initially diagnosed you, who do you recommend that I go to for a second opinion? What I know now is that any doctor worth their weight in gold, or in whatever the saying is, will say absolutely get a second opinion, and may even recommend another cancer center where you can do that. So if I could do anything differently, that in my dad's own journey, that's what I would do. I would have insisted on a second opinion much sooner, maybe at the beginning, and either helped him navigate that conversation or asked him for permission to have it myself at one of his oncologist appointments. So as you can imagine, navigating my dad's 2 cancers, the chronic lymphocytic leukemia and then lung cancer, little did I know then, prepared me for my own diagnosis in ways that I couldn't have anticipated. And, when it was my turn, I was tired and I was overwhelmed, and I, really wanted someone to just take over. But I already also knew how to navigate the cancer system, and I had already done it for someone that I loved. And that knowledge was hard won, and I didn't want to give it away. Hi, I'm a 10-year breast cancer survivor. And when I was diagnosed with stage 3 breast cancer, I hadn't had a mammogram in 4 years. I thought I could wait. I couldn't. For Latina and Hispanic women, breast cancer is the leading cause of cancer death, and we're often diagnosed later when it's harder to treat. But early detection changes everything. Today, the guidance is simple. Start mammograms at 40 and don't skip them. And while self-exams aren't a replacement, knowing your body helps you catch changes sooner. So if you've been putting it off, this is your sign. Schedule the mammogram. Know your body. Advocate for yourself, because your life is worth that appointment. So how did I take those lessons in my own cancer experience and maybe, advocate better or more for myself, and what were the limits of that advocacy? So I came prepared to my oncologist appointment after my diagnosis. I came prepared to my appointment with my breast surgeon when I made the decision, or when it was determined that the best way forward was for me to have a double mastectomy, a bilateral mastectomy. I came prepared. I went to the American Cancer Society website, which I think I've mentioned in other episodes is an excellent resource. And I compiled lists. I love making a good list, and a good list of questions is one of my favorite things to put together. So I compiled a list of questions for my oncologist, for my breast surgeon, for my plastic surgeon, because it was determined that I could have a bilateral mastectomy and reconstruction using implants all in the same surgery. So I had a list of questions for each of them. And then later, before I started radiation and I met with the radiation oncologist, I also came prepared to that appointment with a list of questions. And I asked some of the hard questions, which for me included, what are my options? Do I have to have chemo? Do I have to have a bilateral mastectomy? Can I just have one, can I just remove one breast, the breast that had the tumors in it? What are my reconstruction options? What is my prognosis? What's my stage? So all these hard questions that were very hard for me to ask, but also questions about the treatment and the protocol that each of the doctors was recommending, which was hard because really, not just culturally, but also when you're in a situation like that, I feel like your brain just defaults, or it wants to default to trust. You want to trust the medical professional, and you don't want to have to go around asking these same questions of more than one medical professional. So nevertheless, it was hard and not something that I really wanted to do, but I did. I wanted to make informed decisions, and I wanted to be an advocate for myself in ways that I had learned to be from navigating my own father's illness. And yet, that cultural conditioning did not disappear entirely. For example, so my oncologist, whom I love, who saved my life, who was my oncologist for almost 10 years after diagnosis and treatment, kept seeing me every 6 months until actually January was the last time I saw her. She used one of the early appointments, if not the very first one, maybe the second one, but one of the early appointments that I had with her, she used it to walk through a PowerPoint presentation about the impact of diet on cancer survivorship and recurrence. Cited the studies, the research, pointed me in the direction of a documentary that had to do with veganism. She encouraged me to consider veganism, and she kept a close eye on my weight. And I wouldn't say that I was overweight when I was diagnosed, but I had a 3-year-old. That had been my 5th pregnancy. I was 46 when I was diagnosed, so probably perimenopausal or approaching perimenopause. So, but I wasn't like 120 pounds soaking wet like when I was in my 20s, nor did I expect to be, considering that I had carried 5 pregnancies. But I didn't consider myself overweight, but she kept a really close eye on my weight. And honestly, I didn't push back the way I wish I had, even though it made me uncomfortable, even though I remember thinking, and even telling my husband after that appointment, like, really, we're going to talk about diet and exercise? And I hadn't yet had friends and family and community members recommend diets to me, because I hadn't broadly shared my diagnosis, but it was just kind of, I didn't expect it. And because she was my oncologist, because my staging was, pretty advanced, because she came very highly recommended, because I was scared, because the default was, don't question the doctor. The doctor knows best. The doctor's the authority. Even when the conversation was upsetting or triggering, like the one about diet and weight, even when the focus on weight and eating habits felt reductive and shaming in the middle of treatment, I didn't push back. And if I could go back now from where I stand today, what I would say to her that I didn't say then, not in anger, not from a nasty place, just from a place of clarity, I would ask her to explain to me how exactly what she was presenting to me impacts me personally, my body type, my history, my medical history, because the other thing that whole presentation about the importance of diet and eating the right foods and all of that she gave it came at a really vulnerable time for me. I was recently diagnosed and already in my own head thinking, did I do this? Did I do something to cause this? So it messed with my head a little bit. So I would stop her and I would say, before we go on, please explain to me how this is directly linked to my diagnosis and to my own personal medical history, or what do you see that I don't, or what do you know that I don't? And that conversation continues today, by the way, with other doctors and with my oncologist. In the almost 10 years that I saw her, almost every visit had an element of diet and weight and so forth. And in the past 10 years, I've gained weight, I've lost weight. And so that was always a topic of conversation. And with my primary care physician, with my endocrinologist, almost every doctor that I've seen since my diagnosis, especially when I've gained some weight, the conversation has been, you need to make lifestyle changes. It's calories in, calories out, very simple. Even at a time when I was coaching a running group here in my town, helping them to train for the Miami Full and the Miami Half Marathon, and was myself training for the Miami Half Marathon. I was exercising, I was eating according to the training plan that I was leading this group through, and I had gained a ton of weight and it wasn't coming off. Even then, the doctors told me, you must be doing something, must be something that I was doing. Anyway, I'm about to get on a soapbox. Let me come back down. But the really infuriating thing or frustrating thing is that this type of advice given by a medical professional seems to ignore the impact of chemo, of chemical menopause, which the chemo put me into, of the aromatase inhibitor that I took for almost 10 years and just stopped taking on May 13th after my oncologist said I could. The impact of all these things on my metabolism. My chemo-induced menopause that arrived when I was 46 years old, right? Too early for full-blown menopause. The documented effects of all of these things on weight. And also what's frustrating is these conversations happen with these doctors who know I'm a survivor, as if my job as a survivor is to diet and exercise and shrink or die. And I don't know if you've noticed me uncomfortably shifting in my seat, but even as I'm sharing all this with you, I'm trying really hard not to qualify, and I think I've already qualified a little bit, not to qualify what I'm saying by these are good people and these are good doctors, and I'm cringing inside as I'm saying all this because somehow I feel like I have to qualify my lived experiences because I'm speaking what feels like disrespectfully about these uber educated and experienced and respected and highly recommended and highly renowned medical professionals. So all this to say, my dear listeners, my hermanas, that diet culture in the medical field and in medical appointments is real, including in oncology appointments. Well-meaning doctors who genuinely want the best for their patients and keep up on the latest research and reports and even initial early research about things like weight and the impacts of weight on people and cancer and all of that. Even they can easily still reduce a complex survivorship experience to what a patient eats, a survivor eats, and how much a survivor weighs. And that's just not acceptable. And you are not required to accept it quietly. And I want to just add a little note here because I did a little research, and the research confirms that aromatase inhibitors, which is a standard post-treatment therapy, especially for ER-positive breast cancer survivors like I am, they're associated with weight gain and metabolic changes that that can't just simply be reversed by diet and exercise. Not to mention chemo-induced menopause, which also or further disrupts hormonal regulation of metabolism. I mean, those aromatase inhibitors, their purpose is to bring further, this is an oversimplification and not the medical explanation of what they do, but they further lower the estrogen in your system, is my understanding, and they also make it harder for cancer cells and estrogen receptors to interact. So telling survivors that it's calories in and calories out is not only condescending, but it's potentially medically inaccurate for this population, for survivors. And I think that is an important note to drop here for you to consider. So let's talk about some practical tools to help you do something with all of this. All right. I have 4 tools, I think, that I want to share with you. Tool number 1 is prepare before every appointment. Whether it's your first or your 10th or your first time with a different doctor who is in your continuum of survivorship care, go to the cancer.org website. That's the American Cancer Society website, cancer.org, and search through their resources. They have lists of questions, proposed questions that you can ask your oncologist, your surgeon, your radiation oncologist. Use these resources. I know some of you, or maybe many of you, are probably thinking, why are you sending us to a website? We can just ask Chat, or we can ask Claude, or we can ask any number of AI tools that are out there. And sure, I mean, if that's what you want to do, my only warning is that remember that these large learning models or language learning models or whatever they're called, sorry, Elder Gen X here, these AI tools aggregate information. So, go to a source that specializes in supporting cancer survivors of all types and check their resources, especially for questions that you can ask at a medical appointment. Write your questions down before you go in, whether it's in your note app in your phone or in a notebook. I kept a notebook where I wrote down my questions that I wanted to ask before I went in to see my doctor. Sometimes I passed that notebook on to my husband because whatever, I wasn't feeling well, or I was feeling overwhelmed, or I wanted to be paying attention and fully present in each appointment. So I would pass that notebook on to my husband. He would ask the questions. He would jot down the notes. But if you can, bring someone who can take notes so that you can actually listen. And you're allowed to record your appointment on your phone with your doctor's permission. So if you can't bring someone with you, ask your doctor for permission to record the appointment so that you don't have to keep all that information or in your head or be jotting notes down frantically. All right, so this practical tool number 1 is visit cancer.org before your next oncology or survivorship appointment and download their question guides or refer to them and jot down questions that are relevant to you or important to you. And remember that these guides and these resources exist specifically so you don't have to figure out what to ask from scratch. All right, tool number 2, an important one considering how we started this episode. Get a second opinion, always. A second opinion is not a betrayal of your doctor. It is standard medical practice. Any physician worth their credentials will tell you this themselves. You don't have to tell your primary oncologist that you're getting one if you don't want to. You can simply go. Or you can ask your primary oncologist. You can say, I want a second opinion about whatever, your diagnosis, the course of treatment. At any point in your after diagnosis and your survivorship, you can get a second opinion, and you can ask your oncologist, and you can ask your oncologist to recommend where to get a second opinion from. There are cancer centers that will allow your records to be forwarded to them, and they will review them, and they will give you a second opinion just on the basis of your paper records or your digital records. So take advantage of that. And major cancer centers like MD Anderson, Memorial Sloan Kettering, Baptist Miami Cancer Center, Sylvester Cancer Center here, both of which are here in Miami, they offer second opinion consultations. Use them. My own oncologist offered me time to get a second opinion. It's okay. Do it. So, practical tool number 2, especially if you are newly diagnosed or you're facing a major treatment decision, call the nearest NCI designated cancer center and ask about their second opinion consultation process. It may even be covered by your insurance. Right? So tool number 3, also an important one, especially in light of my rant about diet culture and diet culture in cancer treatment. Find a registered dietitian who specializes in cancer survivorship. Not your general practitioner or your primary care physician, not a well-meaning friend with a smoothie recipe. A registered dietitian with specific experience working with breast cancer survivors. Very important. And lean on them not only for questions of nutrition, and by the way, before I go on, the cancer center that I was treated at has a survivorship program, and among the services that they offer are the services of registered dietitians. So check your cancer center or wherever it is that you're receiving treatment to see if they offer something similar, and of course to see if your insurance covers it. But registered dietitian is so important because during treatment, especially if you're getting chemo, you are going to lose your appetite. You are going to feel nauseated. You may throw up after treatment, immediately after or for a few days after. And maintaining your weight and your strength is very important so that you can continue to receive treatment and progress in treatment. So a registered dietitian can help support you in that. And they can also serve as an ally who can help you to prepare for appointments where your doctor may talk about diet and losing weight or watching your weight or consuming a certain type of diet, recommending a certain type of diet. And that may feel reductive to you, like your survivorship is being reduced to diet and exercise or diet and weight. Registered dietitian can help be an ally in preparing you for those types of conversations. And I think very important to me, and something that I've only learned myself and embraced myself in the past 3 to 5 years, is that a registered dietitian that is experienced in breast cancer, and again, even if they're not Hispanic or Latino, I want to say if they're a registered dietitian with their credentials, they can also help you advocate for your cultural foods. So our cultural foods are often dismissed at best and demeaned or insulted at worst as being unhealthy, but many of our cultural foods are nutrient dense in their own right, and a registered dietitian has that knowledge and can help you to push back against a one-size-fits-all dietary advice or dietary plan for while you're in treatment and for after treatment. So this practical tool is ask your oncologist or your survivorship program for a referral to a registered dietitian who has experience with breast cancer survivors. And if they don't have one, ask for a referral to a survivorship clinic at a major cancer center. Okay? Tool number 4, push back out loud in the appointment. You're allowed to say, for example, I hear you and I want to understand this better. Can you explain how this recommendation accounts for the metabolic changes from my aromatase inhibitor? That's an example of a specific question you can ask if the conversation turns to diet and exercise, or diet and weight, sorry. I want to pause there for a minute because I caught myself saying diet and exercise and then I changed it to diet and weight. It is very important that you eat and eat well post-diagnosis, post-treatment, and for the rest of your life. And it's also important that your survivorship isn't reduced to this stress, anxiety-inducing, constant, almost obsessive attention on food. Okay? So nutrient-dense foods, always important whether you're a cancer survivor or not. Yeah. So those conversations are important. Exercise is important. I talked about this, I think, in episode 7 or 8, about how exercise is one of the pillars of my self-care, one of my pillars of self-care. But I also want to say that you can say to a doctor, I'd like to table the weight conversation for today and focus on my treatment plan, focus on my survivorship, focus on my upcoming surgery. It's okay to say that. That's not rude. It's very brief and to the point. It's very clear. Clear is kind, I think Brene Brown says, and that's true in conversations with your medical provider. And you're also allowed to say, I don't feel comfortable with this recommendation and I'd like a second opinion, whether it's about your diet or about a treatment or a course of action in your survivorship. Okay, it's okay to say, I don't feel comfortable. Or how about, I don't feel comfortable with this conversation about diet and weight. I'd like to focus on something else. Or I'd like to talk to a registered dietitian about this. And if the doctor makes you feel shame for eating your cultural foods, even if it's not intentional, which I want to believe that it is not intentional 99.9% of the time, but that may also be the problem, is that there is no intention, no thoughtfulness sometimes when a doctor shames you for eating your cultural foods, whether that's white rice, beans, plantains, yuca, all of it. You are allowed to name that and ask them to reconsider. You don't have to be an expert. You don't have to provide research to them for them to respect your cultural practices and your cultural foods. Okay? So I'm giving you a permission slip here. Sometimes we have to educate ourselves so we can educate our doctors. Permission to educate yourself and to educate your doctor. You don't have to lean completely, or the sun does not rise and set on everything that comes out of your doctor's mouth. Help them unlearn the harmful diet culture paradigms that they were trained in or not trained in. Often let's also, give them tons of grace. They often are not trained in diet culture paradigms, and they're worried for you and for their patients, and they want the best for their patients, right? And I understand that educating a doctor or anyone about harmful diet culture can be exhausting and it shouldn't be your job. But until the medical system catches up, especially if it's your life in the balance, it is the job and you are capable of doing it. I give you permission not only to do it, but to learn and become capable to advocate for yourself in that way. And again, want to pause here and say that the women that I work with in my coaching practice and my cancer survivorship coaching practice, they often need someone in their corner helping them prepare for these conversations. And that's part of what coaching and survivorship coaching provides. That's part of what I provide to my clients. And I would love to talk to you about it in a free discovery call. Go to my website at paperbell.me/Eileen Lopez Tomei and book a free call so we can talk about this and I can support you. And I'm going to pause here for just a second, because if what we've been talking about is landing for you, I want you to know there's somewhere you can take it. If you're a cancer survivor who's always been the strong one and you're quietly wondering who you are now that everything's changed, you don't have to figure that out alone. I'm Eileen Lopez Tomei, cancer survivorship coach and fellow breast cancer survivor. And my coaching practice exists for women exactly like you. If today's episode is resonating and you're ready to go deeper, book a free discovery call at paperbell.me/Eileen Lopez Tomei. The link is always in the show notes. Okay, now back to you and to the woman who started this conversation, the one my mother was carrying on that freedom flight in 1969. So my mom was, as I said, 8 months pregnant, trusting the system that she was arriving into to take care of her. And like I said, that trust kept me alive, brought me into this world, kept my family alive. It got me here where I am today. I do not owe that trust contempt or the medical professionals that my family and I put our trust in any sort of contempt. But I do owe it my honesty, because the same deference that protected my parents and my grandparents in 1969 can cost a breast cancer survivor in 2025 if she doesn't know that she has other options or the right to ask for other opinions. So what is it that I want for you, sister survivors, my dear listeners? I want the best possible medical care. Doctors who see you fully, your whole body, your whole history, your culture, your metabolism, your life. I want for you the confidence to ask the questions that I was raised not to ask. The knowledge that second opinions are not insults or betrayals, and the permission to push back on diet culture in a doctor's office. And I also want for you the understanding that advocating for yourself is not the same as being difficult. And that even if it were, there is nothing wrong with being difficult, especially when it has to do with your own health and well-being. Advocating for yourself is the most loving thing that you can do for the body, for your body that is trying to heal. Remember, sister survivors, that we are all doing our best. Remember, sana sana, colita de rana, si no sanas hoy, sanarás mañana. Healing is coming, and your questions are worth asking. Your body is worth fighting for. Thank you so much for coming back to the Sana Sana podcast and for listening to this episode. If you haven't already, I invite you to please subscribe or follow this podcast wherever you're listening. Also, please leave a review. It helps more survivors find the show. And if this episode gave you language for something you've been feeling in the doctor's office, share it. Another survivor needs to hear it. Finally, if you're ready to stop navigating survivorship alone, come find me. Book a free discovery call at paperbell.me/Eileen Lopez Tomei. I'd love to be in your corner with you. See you next week. Sana Sana. Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of Sana Sana, the show that helps you heal and restore the parts of your ecosystem that were depleted after a breast cancer diagnosis. If you liked the episode, please leave us a rating and review so we can reach more incredible survivors como tú who want to heal with us. If you want to stay connected with our growing community, check out our Instagram at Eileen Lopez Tomei Coach and share what part of the episode touched your heart today. See you next week.